Good. Well, let's go ahead and begin with faculty focus, our third faculty focus of the spring of 2021. What a year it's been. Um, my name is Jeff Allum. I'm the moderator of AALS's Faculty Focus and the Director of Research and Data Analytics. Really happy to be here with you today, as well as our three speakers and our two co-hosts, where we talk about legal issues, legal education issues that are really pressing at our time in this day and age. And today we have a really interesting trio of speakers who are going to be talking about navigating faculty politics. And we talk specifically with these three because they have a lot of experience in this space, but also because they represent three different types of law schools by category. We have a guest with us from a religiously affiliated private institution, another one from a private institution, and a third speaker from a large public institution. We suspect that there might be some differences and similarities between those different types of law schools, and we'll find out whether or not that's true today, but we're really happy to have everybody in participation in all three speakers today. Our session will be co-hosted by two of our leaders. First is Vince Rougeot. Vince is the president of the AALS and the dean of the Boston College Law School, as well as Darby Dickerson. She's past president of the AALS and the dean of the University of Illinois at Chicago John Marshall Law School. Before we introduce the panel, I'm simply going to walk through how this is going to work for all of you out in the audience. After Vince and Darby give a few opening remarks, Darby will begin, followed by Vince. Each of our three presenters are going to have about 10 minutes to offer some advice, some words of wisdom, some suggestions on navigating faculty politics, beginning with Viral, followed by Ted, and then Melanie. And at the end of this session, there will be some Q&A, which will be moderated by Vince Rougeot. Now, all of you in the audience will be muted, and that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, but rather we do want to hear from you by using the chat features as well as the Q&A features. So if you have something you'd like to chat or share, feel free and use that. If you have a question for any of our panelists or all of our panelists, please feel free and use the Q&A feature. Vince, at the end of the session, will use that to guide us through what we hope is a pretty interesting conversation. I'm sure it will be. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our co-hosts. Darby, I'll let you begin.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you could join us this afternoon. We think that this is an important topic for more junior faculty to be aware of. We know that as educational institutions, we're made up of human beings, which means that within our organizations, there are unspoken codes of conduct. There are old relationships and sometimes old fights and slights that newer people might not be aware of. There are power dynamics going on. And we want to give you some perspectives on how you might spot these things and navigate your way through them. So we appreciate you joining us here today. We see it as a member benefit of your Learned Society, the AALS. And as we're wrapping up the spring season, we hope that you will let us know if this is something that we should be continuing for you. And if so, what are some of the topics that would be helpful? Before I introduce the speakers more formally, I'm going to turn it over to Vince to bring some words of greeting.
Thank you, Darby, and welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you here this afternoon for Faculty Focus. And as Darby said, our goal here is to provide you with the kind of support you should expect from your Learned Society, the Association of American Law Schools, and also to be a place of gathering where you can hear from one another as participants, and also, of course, hear from us and our panelists in ways that are safe and sort of, encouraging and engaging for you, because we know we try to pick topics that really do allow you to ask those questions that maybe you're not always comfortable asking at your home institutions, and also to give you sort of a community of folks to share your experiences with. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're looking forward to the discussion. We have a great panel assembled for you, and we thank you for joining.
Thanks, Vince. As you've already heard, we have three experts who will be sharing insights and information and tips with you. We're going to start with Viral Miles, who's a professor of law at Columbus School of Law, which is part of Catholic University. Next, we'll move to Ted Ruger, the Dean and Bernard G. Siegel Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania. And we'll wrap it up with Melanie Wilson, Dean Emeritus and the Lindsay Young Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Tennessee. So Veeral, will you please start off our discussion?
Sure. Thank you so much, Darby and Vince, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. As I was telling my colleagues earlier, I'm not totally sure how I'm going to really be able to kick this off in a way that will be most helpful. But as a former dean and someone who has worked with numerous junior faculty members from the hiring through promotion and tenure process, I'm going to approach it that way. I added a bit of a subtitle to the title of this program, Navigating Faculty Politics. The subtitle would be, what I would recommend to my junior colleagues is to focus on the pathway to promotion and tenure. And that should be your main focus. But of course, you want to be true to yourself. And so there may be many things that you would like to do in the process. I was thinking about something that was attributed to the former and the late, I should say, House Speaker Tip O'Neill, who said that all politics is local. And I think that that's so very true with respect to, of course, the politics at our schools. It's very, very local. And so what we need to do in beginning our career at any institution is to get a lay or get the lay of the land. And I think there are three basic things that need to be done, at least three, to start the process, three conversations. The first, of course, is with your dean. And your dean is very responsible for you and should protect you and educate you about the process of promotion and tenure, and but also to take some time to get a sense of who you are. And obviously they know something about you because they hired you. But it's important for them to get a feel of the things that you hope to do as a scholar, as a teacher, as a member who's going to contribute to the mission of that organization. And then the second person that I hope each of you are able to find is that very senior faculty member who has sort of seen it all, but preferably someone who's worked with the committee on promotion and tenure, not only within the law school, but perhaps at the university level as well, and might be somewhat of the historian of all matters that have occurred at the law school during their tenure that I think can be very important and informative and help you with some of the unwritten histories about promotion and tenure at the institution. And then last but not least, get to know your colleagues on the faculty who have been most recently promoted and tenured, because they can offer you some very, very good counsel about the things that they did that were most helpful, maybe the things that they probably shouldn't have done, but nevertheless, they were successful, and the things that they wish they had done. And I think if you start off with that, you're probably in a good place as you begin this particular process. But I thought I'd take a few moments just to offer some thoughts about the criteria that we are generally sharing as law schools in terms of evaluating you for promotion and tenure, scholarship, teaching, your service, and the mission, and serving the mission of the institution. So what's the terrain with respect to the scholarship? I think clearly all of the individuals that I just mentioned that you should be speaking to can talk to you about the types of scholarship that the school values, the amount that they are expecting from you with respect to that, and how it should be assessed. And it's all different at different schools. I think of an experience that we had at my school where we had a lateral member of the faculty join us who was very excited about the acceptance of a textbook that was going to be published. And it was very valued at the institution that she came from, but for purposes of our institution that would be looking at her scholarship, we were more interested in the original theoretical and doctrinal scholarship that she would do, not to minimize the significance of the textbook, but we knew that we had to make certain that we had the original scholarship in place. But on the subject of difficult conversations, or maybe different types of scholarship that you might want to do that are not traditional at your school, I think it's important to be true to yourself. So for example, if you're at a school that does not have anybody that might be doing critical race theory, how is that going to play at your school with respect to the consideration of your scholarship? And I think if the dean has a sense of that being important to you, remember we're educators, and it would probably be a good opportunity for you to educate your colleagues about the significance of that scholarship and the contribution that it makes to law and society, and begin early in terms of sharing your scholarship, vetting your scholarship, doing brown bags with your colleagues, and maybe even bringing the entire community into the conversation as well. So at the time that you reach the promotion and the tenure, they're familiar with it, they're familiar with you, and it does become part of the valued consideration of your scholarship. With respect to the terrain that you may travel in terms of teaching, in general, I think we all want to know what good teaching is and value teaching is at a particular law school. And I think one of the things that is very important is to find out who are some of the best teachers at your school, the best in terms of how they're assessed by their colleagues, but students as well. Watch them, visit their classes, ask them to see what you're trying to do as well. And if you want to raise some very critical and topical but difficult issues in your teaching, talk to your colleagues to see if they've done that in the past. And if you're going to be the first, well, be brave, but make certain that whenever you are addressing difficult and sensitive topics, make sure that you include all perspectives, because what we're trying to do as educators and as educators of lawyers is to make sure that they understand all of the different sides of the debate. This could be a great contribution that you can make, and it's something that you shouldn't be afraid of, and hopefully others have done it. But if they haven't, you should give it a try and talk to colleagues at other schools. And one thing I would ask you to do is let your dean know what you're thinking about doing, because deans don't like to be surprised. They like to know what might be presented to them. So it's always a good idea to share that with the administration. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the terrain of service and mission. You know, as law schools, we all have one common mission, and that is to prepare our students to be competent and ethical lawyers. But each school has another mission, a mission that may be related to their university. Perhaps you're coming from a school that serves a specific demographic, and that's a mission that you need to be aware of. Maybe you're going to be at a state school, and it's a flagship school where the state looks to the law school to train the future legislators and the judges and to serve on the judiciary conferences. That's important. Or a school like my own that is religiously affiliated, where the mission is an extremely important part of the university and all of the schools that we have there. How do you make your place at that institution? And you ought to come to understand what that mission is all about. Let me just share this with you. At my school, our board of trustees likes to learn about how each person who's going to be tenured sees how they share the values and contributes to the mission of the institution. And so there's usually an essay that's included in the application process where the applicant gets an opportunity to reflect on how they've served the mission during the tenure process. It's a very important thing that you should remember. And one thing you should always remember, that it's local. So I'll end with that and let my colleagues proceed.
Thank you, Vero. We'll next move on to Ted. Ted, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vero, for that. And you hit many of the points I would, so you made my role easier. And, you know, I think as I was joking with some colleagues getting on the call today, like this is having, you know, of course, been a faculty member here and then dean now for 6 years, that with a roiling faculty politics, like this is a panel I feel really prepared for, and I didn't do any specific preparation, but it is, it is one where I've seen from all sides. And I guess, I guess I've seen this, of course, coming as an untenured professor and seeing the kind of many of the things that I'll amplify that Viral had said. And then actually the way the dean searched, I was an internal dean candidate, so that felt very political that whole year. And then of course, seeing a different side of faculty politics, and a few points I'll make in a few minutes, how different law school faculty politics are than some of the other bigger schools here at this university, and many, and the theme there is we're kind of, not only is all politics local, as Professor Miles said, but we're kind of like, from a governance point of view, we're like a simple legislature or a committee of the whole, which I actually think is an advantage for both deans and new professors and everything in between. Because what I see at a place like the Wharton Business School or the medical school or all of our arts and sciences department, it's highly departmentalized, in my view, more Byzantine, harder to get things done, easy to be blocked. And I just think there's so that's a feature. And this goes from, the perspective that I remember from a young professor and new professor. And then I think the challenge that we all feel when we're not tenured yet, or we're coming in, is the committee of the whole dynamic, that this egalitarian dynamic that we have on law faculties, which is distinct. You kind of feel like you have to politic with everybody, right? Now that can feel like a burden. And certainly when I came in, and then again when I was a decanal candidate for what seemed like the whole year, everybody's a voter, and everybody, and that can feel like you're always presenting have to present your best face. That I think I want to acknowledge, I think that is an accurate feeling as an untenured professor. It is my recommendation, as that's kind of part of the, again, at a well-run institution, no institution would demand perfection or unanimity in kind of the tenure vote or discussion. So, I don't want to kind of make it too high a bar, but I do think that that's part of it. And I do feel like, and just sort of making sure that you're a good colleague to, and again, to amplify Professor Miles. The dean is important. And specifically, I remember in my first job at a different school, Washington University in St. Louis, how grateful I was for incredibly crystal clear, in hindsight, almost too restrictive, but it was so helpful, direction about exactly what I should write for tenure. And it was basically 3, maybe 4 full-length, heavily footnoted law review articles in student law journal. Now, I do think in hindsight now that's too limited. They would not have said peer reviewed. They would not have said, but like they had a memo and I followed it to the letter, and that worked well for me. And then ultimately I moved here and it worked at Penn, but it was so helpful to have that. And I guess, so be careful, because a lot of you are brilliantly interdisciplinary and you collaborate. So it can be something you want to clear with your institution's powers that be. Like, what is it? What about writing multiple shorter pieces in peer-reviewed journals? We like that here. Frankly, they're probably read far more widely than the long law review articles, but not every institution might do that. Professor Miles mentioned case books and textbooks, I think can be risky pre-tenure. If you are a legal historian or a sociologist or somebody, you want to get, and we do this here, you want to get clearance that, just like in a history department, you can get tenure on one book. Now it puts a lot of pressure, but it puts some pressure on the book, but we would give tenure and we would kind of discuss that from day one on that. So if your scholarship is kind of eclectic or different, you want to discuss that early on. Co-authorship. Again, we want to encourage that, but pre-tenure, what you need to have your own voice come through. So if you're going to co-author, try to do it with multiple different co-authors, and then write some on your own, so that there's not a question. If you're always writing with the same co-author, there may be an issue about regressing out your distinctive voice. The other thing for those of you, and you'll have this is a nice problem to have, but it is a problem as you think about your agenda, and then you start getting invited and you want to say yes to shorter, like symposium pieces, essays, which are fabulous, but be careful of having that like derail your somewhat more core tenure pieces. It's an issue that some pre-tenure folks have. So I'd say all of those are important. I mean, I guess again, and Professor Miles covered some of my stuff. I would say, in addition, to find out who your mentors are. Like, nobody is hired without some real strong supporters on the faculty. You may know that through the hiring process, but they're going to be your strongest supporters for the tenure decision. Another thing I would say that it took me a while to learn, naturally is like, and this is delicate to say, I would say every law faculty, because we work so many years together, we all have one or two or more colleagues who like they're valued colleagues in many ways, but like we kind of roll our eyes in the faculty lounge when they talk. Okay, and you guys can fill in the blanks on your own faculty, but if you're new, if you're a candidate, or if you're new, you may think that everybody's, oh my God, look, this person's criticizing me, and so that's a a hard one. But just realize that if you're ever getting criticized or feel like you're not connecting with somebody, it may not be you. It's probably not you. Have confidence in yourself. Have confidence in who your allies are, and be well aware that maybe most of the faculty is saying, "Hey, this person's a good teacher, a friend of mine, but I don't really agree with them on appointments or tenure issues." So, and that goes on any faculty as we get to know each other. So don't be deterred by that. A couple other groups about this kind of political firmament I would mention would be, we've been talking about faculty, but let's not forget, and I appreciate it so much more during the pandemic, like the staff that work at our law schools that really are so embedded, and for the deans, and for like, they're so much a part of the school. And I've never seen somebody be affected for tenure who's not generous or working well with the staff. I think I can think of at least one visitor who knows whether we would have went for this person, but the fact that they were much nicer to the faculty than the staff was remarkable. And we, at the margins, we want people who treat our staff, all levels of staff, well, and I think every law school would want that, and it's the right thing to do, and it's going to make your jobs easier as well. So I think even in this faculty panel, I need to acknowledge that. And then there's something of the politics with the students, not just being a great teacher, which you should aspire to be, but as you get, especially as being a professor who works with students, I mean, I can say at this law school, at most, when we're making hiring and promotion decisions, we do listen to our students. So having a base of support, yes, of course, good teaching and improving teaching, but students who would say like this faculty member is very important to my legal education, to my career, that can be something that we really do listen to. I mean, again, it's one of many variables, but it really has helped put people over the top. Very last thing, as we think about faculty politics, would be this. It's I don't know if this is politics. It's probably more networking, but this is true at every stage of your career. But for the tenure stage, keep in mind that most institutions are going to be going out for 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 external review letters, and kind of almost from day one be thinking about, and you can't always manage it, but you can certainly make sure that there's a group of scholars who you admire, who you're sharing your work with, once we can travel a bit, maybe you're traveling to conferences or workshops with them. I kind of stumbled into a thing my first couple of years where I'd almost like crash these small conferences. Yeah, I mean, I'd pay my way and I'd just say, "Hey, can I sit in the room and listen?" And then they would let me comment. They weren't inviting me to write a paper, but they'd let me comment on a paper. And these were people I admired in my field, and I got to know them a bit. And it's I would do a mix of things with all respect to the large AALS conferences. If you find little subject matter conferences that are exactly the people that you'd like to interact with. So think about that. And it's never going to be a neat straight line thing, because you can't predict who's going to write which letters, but you kind of want to get your voice heard and get a range of people who are mentors who know your work outside the building as well. So I'm happy to, we can discuss this more interactively, but those are some of what I would build on Professor Miles' good points.
Thank you, Ted. We'll next move to Melanie.
Thanks to the entire AALS team for inviting me to join the conversation. I'm certainly honored to be on this panel with Professor Miles and Dean Ruger. I want to make 3, I think, quick points and then open it up so we can have some conversation, because I think my colleagues have covered some really good ground. I guess I'd say, number one, when I joined the academy, I was really surprised by how much faculty politics really is a dominant force in many, if not most, law schools. So I want to just mention that. And the second is, you really do, to be really successful, I think you want to be able to understand those politics and navigate those. And so I'm going to offer just a couple of additional ideas that for consideration, in addition to those that my colleagues have offered. So as I say, I came to academia a little bit later than many. I worked in the private sector at 2 law firms, state government. I worked at the state AG's office and at the U.S. Attorney's office, and I clerked and had really a broad range of experience, and only moved to academia in 2005. And since then, I've worked at four law schools, 1 private and 3 public, and 1 as a visitor. But I have to say that faculty politics really dominate law schools in a way that office politics did not, perhaps surprisingly, in those other work environments that I was in. And that was true even though I was at a state attorney general's office where the attorney general was elected by the people of the state. And even though I was at a U.S. attorney's office where the president appoints the U.S. attorney. So I do think it's a real thing. And I point that out, and I congratulate everybody for being on the call today, because apparently you all really understood that and understand that in ways maybe I didn't. You know, I was so excited to join the legal academy, and these positions are so competitive that, you know, I was so giddy my first couple of years. I'm not sure I thought anything about faculty politics or what I needed to, how I needed to navigate those, or what I needed to know about those. And you know, I think it really is important to be successful, frankly, to understand what's going on. And, you know, I learned in time that it really is worth being aware. And it's different law schools have been very different. The 4 schools I've been at, as I say, 1 as a visitor and 3 working full time, the politics were very different in terms of the important decisions that go on. So retention, tenure, promotion, to a lesser extent, you know, who gets the plum committee assignments and similar perks. It varied a lot from school to school as to whether the politics played a big role in those really important decisions or played a smaller role. And that's why I guess my advice to you is really pointed at how do you navigate finding out how important it is in those decisions, and then how you navigate that. And so I would say, you know, two things you really need, and that is just as Professor Miles and Dean Ruger said, you want to be focusing on your scholarly agenda. You want to be focusing on your research and your writing and your articles and good teaching and service. But you know, you've got this other piece hanging around. So what do you do about that? And I would say you need mentors and you need champions. And you know, you can put whatever label on these folks you want, but these are 2 groups of people that are really going to help you in the long run navigate successfully, I think, the faculty politics. And mentors, I think, play a super important role in that. And you want to, usually law schools will assign you a mentor or 2 mentors early on. And that's fantastic. But I think you also want some organically found mentors that you know suit you well. And I think the question there is, well, how do I find mentors? How do I know who the right mentor is? I really do think you need to spend some time focusing on this. And going back to Professor Miles' point, which is, you know, your dean hired you, has a lot invested in you. So that's a first place to sit down and talk with your dean about who might be a good mentor for you. Because interestingly, sometimes the mentors assigned to you are actually assigned for faculty political reasons, and they may not be, in fact, the best mentor for you, surprisingly, I think. So if you're going to teach on one of these sensitive areas, if you're gonna need to vet that with somebody, you want to have good mentors. You want to know where the pitfalls are, and those folks can really help with that. They can also help, of course, identify these champions that I'll talk about in a minute. But in addition to your dean that you can spend time with, you want to ask probably your academic dean. If you're at lunch or in informal settings, you know, who might be a good mentor? Who are the best mentors on the faculty? You might want to ask your faculty development dean. And then I think you also want to just listen to that little voice inside of you and in your gut as to who might be a really supportive person who can have those conversations with you about, you know, okay, this is what the tenure standard says. And if it's ambiguous, or if there's anything left to guesswork, you know, what are the real standards? What are the real unwritten policies? And again, where are the pitfalls? And then the other thing that they can help you do is they can identify people I call champions. And those are people within the law school and outside the law school, I think, that really know, they have political pull, if you will. They're oftentimes the people that don't have any sort of title. They're not an associate dean, they're not a dean, but they're people that can pull people and push people when you really need it. when the chips are really down. And mentors, if you have good mentors, they'll help you identify those people. They'll help you identify people outside of your college. If you're at a university, they'll help you identify people across campus that will be helpful to your career, and also outside of your university for some of these opportunities that Dean Ruger was talking about in terms of identifying people who might be able to review your work. So I'll stop there. I think my co-panelists have given you tremendous advice, but I would just, again, focus on the mentors and the champions along the way as well.
Well, thanks to all of our panelists. I think we're off to a really rich start. We've put out a lot of great information for everyone to think about. Professor Wilson, I was really intrigued by when you pivoted to the role of the dean, because I think one thing to remember is that the dean usually has it in his or her interest to create a harmonious whole. Seeing the dean as a potential ally in the dean's group as a place where you can find people who are invested in you now that you've been hired, I think is a really important insight. But let me throw something out to the three of you to get us started. There is often, some, let's call it less than, collegial behavior that goes on, where certain members of the faculty attempt to draw junior faculty into their battles. And there are a couple of ways they might do this. They might co-opt them specifically by saying, you really have to vote this way on this issue. Or they might do something even worse, in my opinion, and say, Professor so-and-so really has it out for you. They didn't support you, but I'm here for you. Here's what you need to do. How do junior colleagues navigate these situations where they're being, actually being manipulated in ways that may be unhealthy and damaging for them longer term? Professor Miles, why don't we start with you? You're on mute right now, say with you.
Sorry about that. Yes, the descriptions that you provided are familiar ones that I've seen. I've been on the faculty of two different law schools myself, and that does occur. I have to say that one of the things I found as a dean that I hoped gave a junior colleague comfort was their comfort with me as the dean, and feeling free to come to me as the dean to say, Professor X has asked me to do such and such, and I don't know how to say no. I'm not sure if I can say no, but I really don't have the time, or really maybe even the interest, to assist in that project. And I think junior faculty members should understand exactly what both Dean Wilson and Dean Rigaud have said. We have a lot, deans have a lot. I'm not a dean anymore, but you're part of the legacy of the dean, and the dean loves you very much. I have to say that. They want you to be successful. And so you really do need to go to that dean and talk to the dean about the situation, and allow the dean to, hopefully the dean is diplomatic and they know how to handle that, or at least give the junior faculty member who feels comfortable some advice as to how they may want to exit that situation. So the dean is a great resource for that, because the dean knows the colleagues very well. And also the senior faculty member that might be your mentor is a good resource as well. But I would think first and foremost to go to the dean, because the dean knows the personalities and the tendencies and the practices of their colleagues. And that's one of the reasons that they're there. And hopefully their relationships with their colleagues are pretty good, pretty solid. They're going to be better with some colleagues than other colleagues. But I think that's what I would recommend any junior faculty member to do, and not just sit there and find themselves getting drawn into a project that may really take them away from the things that are so critical to their progress.
Thanks. Any other thoughts, Dean Ruger?
Yes, I think the dean is important, and the culture of the school, and I think especially if you have a school with the luxury of having faculty as we do of over 45, 50 standing faculty, but I think this would apply at slightly smaller schools. I mean, I think the deans and every tenured colleague should have a few norms, like junior colleagues don't have to serve on any time consuming committees. And I think, we lose something. Of course, we'd love to have our brilliant junior colleagues serve on the appointments committee and recruit others. We rely on them in other ways through recruiting and identification, but you want to, the service and the decisions on a big committee, I think institutions should protect junior faculty for that. And then even the voting. Now, we have open voting. Some schools have closed voting, but I think that the hypothetical about, how are you going to, I think we have encouraged junior faculty to happen to not come to that meeting if it comes down to such a, they should not be required to take a position and look, every school is a little different, but I think that kind of, you should not have to cast a vote that might implicate your tenure. And I would say, yes, the dean's important, but hopefully it's a whole cohort of senior colleagues that protect junior faculty in that way.
Well, and maybe I'll put a gloss on the question and flip it back to Professor Wilson. What about from the other side? How do you speak to, because we do have some more senior colleagues in the audience, how do you speak to a more senior colleague, or how do you tell a junior colleague to be wary of particular individuals on the faculty who have a tendency to, for lack of a better way of putting it, to behave badly in this context? What's the best way to do that? Either one-on-one, if you're in position as an administrator or as a colleague, a peer, or directly to the junior colleague about someone that is sort of problematic.
Yeah, I do think that's the tougher of the two, because I think in the prior situation, the dean or the associate dean can provide some cover, right? And just, that's the easier piece. But I do think, at least when I was dean and just as a general rule, I try to say as little bad about anybody ever. So my advice would be to try to redirect the person to someone who might be a better fit, a better mentor. Because, in any given situation, somebody might really be a great fit or a great mentor for somebody, even though they're typically maybe a little more difficult, or, if I personally found them difficult. So I do think you could have those conversations, and I would try to have those conversations one-on-one and just talk about some of the benefits of some other people as mentors. But certainly I would always try never to disparage somebody else, which it can be difficult at times when you really feel like somebody has picked a bad mentor, a bad match for them. But I think you can just express it in that way, that somebody else is a better match, or would be of professional, there'd be a lot of professional benefit to waiting to essentially associate with that other person until they're more senior.
Let me ask a slightly different question. Someone in the chat asked about whether anyone had any particular advice for women faculty of color. And I thought maybe actually we could broaden that a bit, because I was thinking a little bit about the need we all may have sometimes to, and you all spoke on this, the kind of, all politics is local, but one of the things we really have to do as we develop our careers is to build an external constituency as well, if only for review letters for the tenure file, but really to be a part of the conversation to build our careers. But as we know, different faculties react differently to a person who may have a strong external constituency and perhaps maybe struggling internally because perhaps there aren't a lot of people in his or her field, or perhaps because they're one of the few faculty members of color. So, I'll throw that out to each of you, and you can approach it from the perspective you find most interesting or engaging from your perspective. So Ted, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, so I think I would say, there's a dynamic that is overdue it's an important dynamic, it's overdue. It is almost certainly supported by most deans and hiring chairs and the majority of most faculties today, which is building a more inclusive and truly kind of representative legal professoriate. That I know we have one of the leading experts who has studied and exposed some of this in Professor Miradio on our call, and I enjoyed her book, Unequal Profession, about legal academia, and I ordered some for our colleagues. So Mira, I feel like Mira should jump in and answer. But the look, we're not, we're woefully, and this was the long tenure path, the no retirement age. We kind of reflect the hiring practices of the last 30 years, right? All of us, and so. So I would say most institutions belatedly are finally recognizing that it's imperative that we recruit and attract extremely talented individuals from backgrounds that we didn't used to hire. And there's support from students, and I guess that's what's important. But there is, and I'll be blunt, at this school, I think at every school we don't call it structural or entrenched racism, sexism, if it was not entrenched and hard to change. And that doesn't usually manifest in overt racism. It does sometimes, but it sometimes manifests as field definitions like, this critical race stuff. Is this a fad? Is this going to pass? There's kind of these demeaning vernacular, which again, I think especially the senior faculty and the dean has to push back against. And I guess I would just acknowledge that faculty of color and women faculty and faculty who don't look like me do have a harder time getting tenure. Okay, that's still true today, and we have to do more to support you. And so I would just let others talk, but I just think it's still a thing. It's less of a thing than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I do see a change even in my time as dean, and because as we hire. That's the other benefit of hiring inclusively is you do start to change the faculty, and then the faculty politics look different, and so or are different. And so I would say, anyway, I'll stop, but it's still we're in the process of some fundamental change of undoing, a century or more's worth of how we built our faculty, and that's going to have some opposition that we need to support you all through.
Professor Miles, Professor Wilson, any additional thoughts?
Sure. I think the lack of diversity in the faculty ranks is still a very serious problem. And at many schools, the numbers are it's very disturbing in that there may be that only one woman of color. And I think one of the things, Dean, that you mentioned is finding colleagues outside of your school. And I think it's important, particularly if you are the only one. And I think there may be some schools where a person of color may in fact be the only one there or one of two. And organizations like the People of Color Conference, the Regional People of Color conferences are extremely supportive and helpful. And they are important to have those kinds of relationships because sometimes there are going to be experiences that are just going to be your only experiences at your institution. But if you know someone else who has been through what you've been through, it does give you some place to go for advice, for support, and for ways of handling those difficult situations. So I would give a plug for the various People of Color regional groups and for those members of the Academy who are the only one at their institution to take advantage of that, to reach out when you see those opportunities, go to those meetings because it's going to be a very important place for support. But as Dean Ruger said, hopefully our colleagues, our dean colleagues are very much aware of the writings about the challenges that people of color on faculties are having. And many years ago, in speaking with a group of deans, I looked out at the deans and I said, look, as a African-American woman, some of my best mentors and best supporters happen to be guys that look like you. So don't be afraid to do that. Be there and be supportive because it can mean the world and make the difference for a person's success at an institution. But we have to do more for that diversity.
Yeah, can I just jump in and echo that? That was going to be my main point, which is, yes, we need more diversity, and we've got to acknowledge the implicit bias that continues to happen in the systemic problems that we have. But I think one of the keys to success is to have mentors and champions that look like you and that relate to how you feel and have had some of the same experiences, but definitely to have others that don't look like you and that come from different backgrounds. I think both of those things are equally important. And everybody needs somebody who will be honest with them about whether they really, whether the unspoken tenure standard is one more article than it says in those in what's written down, et cetera, et cetera. And those people may look like you and they may not look like you. And like Professor Miles, some of my best mentors look nothing like me and come from very different backgrounds. And I'm grateful for all of them, the ones that I really relate to and the ones that are just honest with me and have helped me professionally understand what the objective hurdles are.
It's such an important point because we, as deans, I know we're also encouraging our faculty to understand that their choices about whom to support should also be doing that work, right? Don't necessarily go to the person you in your gut are drawn to, because that's sort of, triggered probably by a lot of your own implicit biases. He played lacrosse just like I did in college. Well, that's going to kind of set you up for a certain kind of match. If we can do the work sometimes to move through that and to really look at people as people that we can actually mentor, regardless of whether or not they look like us, they've had the same experiences that we've had. Actually, some of those mentoring relationships are particularly successful and particularly rewarding. Well, here's a sort of a blunt, hard question. How political are tenure decisions? How much politics have you seen in tenure decisions, and how much should junior faculty worry about that?
I'll jump in. I've been at multiple schools, and at some institutions, really no role. I mean, the little p politics played a role in lots of things, but when it got down to the important decisions and tenure decision, it really did seem to be on the objective criteria. And then I've been at another school where the fights and the quibbles from 4 years before seem to rear their heads and walking the halls and so forth and so on. So I think that's one of the reasons that you do need those mentors, and you need people that will be honest to tell you where the pitfalls are, because some institutions are very different and those things can come up. And I think that's really problematic. But if we're being honest, I think those are the schools and institutions you need to really look out for. And somebody needs to tell you that that's a possibility.
I would quickly add, this doesn't answer the question of how political our tenure. I would say that relatively they're significantly less political than either entry or lateral hiring decisions. I've seen much more politics that might not relate to substance play out on those. And look, I mean, we're lawyers, and one thing so there is politics, but there's nothing more proceduralized than tenure. I mean, I think hiring can be, but tenure is a proceduralized process. And actually, you should ask, one thing we didn't talk about, one thing to take the faculty politics out of it, and this was before I was even at Penn, there was a disagreeable tenure denial, but then we put in a process, and a lot of schools have this, and you could even ask for this, of more rigorous second and third year review, documented in the file, what are the issues? So I do feel like, process, we know as lawyers, is intended to blunt the capricious nature of politics. And so you should kind of be aware. So don't forget that for tenure, at least, there is a lot of process there that might help you, and you should learn it, know it, and even before think about those. I've had junior faculty here. It's impressive. They'll ask for more rigorous first, second, third year reviews, which is a great technique to kind of identify some issues, but also get the institution really vested in you.
Yes, I want to agree with what the dean has suggested, Dean Ruger has suggested. We at our institution, we did not require external evaluations until it's not required until you go through the tenure process. And of course, if you go from associate to a full professor. But when I was dean, we did in fact have some informal review of scholarship. And part of that was just to, make sure that the junior colleague who was in the process of tenure was on the right track. And I do think that the amount of process and procedure that we have in promotion and tenure at most schools really does eliminate a lot of the potential for the very difficult political scenes that we have seen at institutions in the past.
Here's a slightly different question. It's definitely has political ramifications, and I think it's something a lot of us are struggling with more and more as we're trying to diversify faculty hiring. How do we deal with bias around degree granting institutions? In other words, where people have attended school and the impact that has on our ability to really, let's put it, cast a broader net in our hiring, and the complexity with which when we engage that conversation, that really is obviously a lot of difficult political battles within a faculty. So I'll throw that one out.
Let me start by acknowledging the bias, mostly in hiring, but I'll tell a tale on ourselves. So, when I became dean out of a standing faculty of about 50, and hey, we claim to be a national elite, we are in many ways, but we only had 2 of our 50 were University of Pennsylvania Law School graduates, and everybody, so we were even not fancy enough for ourselves. And so in that, we actually, I think about the various underrepresented elements, and we've been pushing on all of them, but we actually doubled the number by hiring Karen Tani and Kim Frizan last year. We went from 2 to 4, actually hiring our own people. So the bias exists. I would say, in response to this question for this group, that this is one where it's such a sharp bias, especially on entry hiring. I haven't seen it though. Once you're in the building, another example, I don't even really know off the top of my head now where my colleagues went to law school. I do think once you're on the faculty, at most places, that bias, once you've gotten that job, that bias would dissipate. Although I welcome other views. Maybe I'm being too rosy on that, but the bias is really big on the entry market, no question.
Yeah, I think there is clearly that tendency, that bias, as you described it, in terms of reviewing those applications from candidates who are trying to come to your school. And you're right, once you're talking about a lateral move, it's less significant because then you've built a body of work and a record that is what people are going to pretty much stand on and evaluate and decide who they want to bring onto their faculty. I guess one of the things that might help reduce the bias is for the faculty and the hiring committee to take a bit of time to discuss what it is that they really need in terms of a hire at that given point. And that should go beyond what are the schools that they graduated from. And that may help a bit to reduce the bias that way. And I think even at my own school, at times when we had specific needs, other variables became important. But you're right, the bias is there.
Sorry, this is my turn to not unmute. All right, well, this will probably be our last question. So, but I'll let all 3 of you engage it. But we've had several questions around issues faced by not only faculty of color in the classroom, and from both sides, from students responding to their attempts to integrate critical theory, for instance, into the classroom. So this is a particular problem for some faculty of color who want to do it, but also for a lot of faculty, all faculty who want to do it. And also how colleagues might respond to those attempts. And as we sit here waiting for the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, it seems to me that this is probably a good question to end on. But I'm sure many colleagues feel that they must do this. They must engage these issues and these topics, but they also feel exposed in doing it. How would you advise them as we try to move forward collectively as a country in these very difficult times.
I hope that we've begun to normalize having those conversations. I think we didn't have those conversations for so long. In hindsight, I teach criminal procedure and criminal law, and I'd been having those conversations for a long time and felt very comfortable. And then with people being more aware of what's going on and a greater focus on it, I actually became more nervous about having the conversations that I'd been having a long time. But I think we're starting to normalize that we can have these conversations in property, and we can have these conversations in contracts, and we're not just having them in criminal law and criminal procedure. And I think that helps a lot. But I think we still have a long way to go, but I hope that we've already begun to move in the right direction, and it will just become less of a negative or potential negative and more of a potential negative if you're not having those conversations when they need to be had.
Let me just say that one of the things that we started doing at our school that I think does help, because the students are very interested, and I mean, these are issues that they're talking about amongst themselves, and I think that oftentimes they want to talk about them as a community. One of the things I think that has helped at our institution is having forums that are generally open school forums that occur around the time that are specifically topical, dealing with the issues that everybody is talking about, as Dean Wilson talked about, that the conversations are normalized and we can bring them into the law school. Some faculty members may not feel comfortable raising those issues, but I think that it is important for those conversations to have, and I think the administration, the dean's office, the academic dean's office, the dean of students office can create the forum that may substitute what might not happen in specific classes where a colleague is just not that comfortable doing it yet. But I do think that the law schools have a responsibility to create that opportunity, and there are different ways to do that.
Dean Ruger, you've got the last word.
Well, I'll just quickly say that how kind of interconnected so many of these issues are with, we started out talking about politics, but then how enmeshed they are with patterns of racism and sexism and kind of tradition, which can mask both of those. And I guess to knit together some of the questions in the Q&A, I feel like I would say from the decanal perspective, most institutions know, or really ought to know, that the kind of best practices that really should not let bias or politics. So so almost kind of look at your institution and maybe seek help from any of us outside institutions. If you don't think your institution is implementing structures to negate the forces of traditionalism or bias, and for instance, there was somebody asked about student evals can be biased against younger women of color. And so every school should have your teaching also evaluated by senior colleagues. No school should make you depend on student evaluations. That's just one example. We talked about various procedural things. So I think that just know that I do think law schools realize that these are structures we want to push through. So I mean, talking with your administration, foregrounding it can be a way, to kind of help address the problem, hopefully before it gets too deep.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you. I'm going to pass it to Darby to close us off.
Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your participation. Thanks for all of the great questions. We've tried to answer some of those in writing in the Q&A box, so you might want to take a look at those if you didn't hear us answer live. Again, we're wrapping up our spring season, but we love your input about whether we should continue these and what topics would be most helpful to you. Have an excellent afternoon, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.